I didn't move. I just set my coffee cup down slowly, the way you do when you need your hands to have something to hold on to. My brother had just finished speaking. The whole table was looking at him, nodding, some of them smiling, and not one person turned to look at me. Not even my mother. I want to tell you what happened that night, but first I need to take you back, because what happened at that dinner table didn't start there. It started 23 years ago in a house with yellow curtains and a driveway that cracked every winter and never got fixed. My brother, I'll call him by what everyone called him, Danny, was the kind of kid that rooms rearranged themselves for. When he walked in, my father's shoulders dropped, the way they only dropped when he was finally relaxed. My mother would stop whatever she was doing. Not dramatically, just stop. The way you stop when something important enters the space. I was 4 years older. I was the one who set the table, who remembered dentist appointments, who learned how to do my own laundry at 9 because my mother was busy helping Danny with a school project that wasn't even due for 2 weeks. I didn't resent him for it. Not then. I was a kid. I thought this was just how families worked. Some people were suns, and some people were the planets circling them. I was a planet. I accepted my orbit. By the time I was in high school, I had learned something useful about myself. I was good with numbers. Not just good. I was the kind of person who could look at a balance sheet and feel calm, the way some people feel calm in nature. Numbers didn't lie. Numbers didn't have favorites. I held on to that. I studied accounting. Graduated. Got a job at a mid-size firm in Columbus before eventually moving back home to take care of my mother after her hip surgery. That was 3 years ago. I told myself it was temporary. It wasn't temporary. Danny, by that point, was 31 and had been getting started on various business ideas for the better part of a decade. There was the food truck that lasted 4 months. The e-commerce thing that I still don't fully understand. The consulting. Consulting what, exactly, for whom? I genuinely could not tell you. My parents never asked. They just kept saying he was figuring it out. They said it the way you say someone is getting there when you've stopped believing they will, but you love them too much to say so out loud. The family business was my father's print shop. 31 years. He had built it from one machine in a garage to a real operation. 12 employees at the peak, contracts with 3 school districts and a regional hospital. It was modest, not glamorous, but it was real. It had weight. My father talked about it the way people talk about something they made with their own hands, which is exactly what it was. I had done the books for the shop for 2 years. My father asked me to help when his accountant retired, and he couldn't afford to replace her right away. I didn't take a salary for it. I told him it was fine. He said he'd make it right when things settled down. Things did not settle down. What I found when I started going through the shop's finances was not catastrophic at first. A few inconsistencies, some vendor payments that didn't match invoices, a state tax filing that had been done wrong 2 years in a row, not fraudulently, just carelessly, the kind of careless that compounds quietly and becomes a serious problem before you notice it. I flagged it. I told my father. He said he'd handle it. He did not handle it. By the time I did a full audit in the spring, the shop owed the state of Ohio just over $47,000 in back taxes, penalties, and interest. There was also an outstanding judgment from a former supplier, not large, around $9,000, but it had been ignored long enough that it had gone to collections and was now attached to the business's credit. I put together a full document. Clean, detailed, everything sourced. I sat down with my father at the kitchen table on a Tuesday evening and I walked him through every line. He listened. He nodded. When I finished, he folded his hands and said, "I'm going to give the shop to Danny." I looked at him. "He needs something to anchor him," my father said. "Something that's his. You've always been fine. You've always landed on your feet." I asked him if Danny knew about the tax debt. My father looked out the window. I asked again. He said, "I'll explain everything to him." I drove home that night with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. The dinner was my mother's idea. She called it a family meeting, but she set the table with the good plates, which meant she wanted it to feel like a celebration. My aunt and uncle came. My cousin. A family friend named Roger who'd known my parents since before I was born. 8 people total. I was the last to sit down. My father gave a small speech. He talked about legacy. He talked about how proud he was of both of his children. He used the word future several times. I watched Danny across the table. He had a small smile, the preloaded kind, like he already knew the punchline. Then my father said it. I've decided to sign the business over to Danny. He'll take over full ownership. It's time. The table responded the way I expected. My aunt said it was wonderful. Roger clapped my brother on the shoulder. My mother dabbed at her eye with a napkin, not because she was sad, but because she was the kind of person who cried at completions. Nobody asked me anything. Nobody looked at my face to see what was on it. Danny said, "I won't let you down, Dad." And then he looked at me across the table, and what he said next, I have turned it over in my mind many times since, and I still don't fully understand the confidence it required. He said, "You understand, right? You got your career. You're good. This just makes more sense." I picked up my coffee cup. I set it back down. I said, "Does it make sense to you, Danny? The business?" He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I mean, have you looked at the books?" The table got slightly quieter. He laughed, a short, uncomfortable sound. Dad said he'd walk me through everything. I looked at my father. My father looked at his plate. I said, "I can walk you through it right now if you want. I have everything on my laptop. It's in my bag." My mother said my name, that warning tone, the one that means, don't. I looked at her and I said, very quietly, "Mom, he needs to know what he's signing." Nobody said anything for a moment. My brother said, "What is she talking about?" And I understood in that silence that my father had not told him. Not any of it. Not the back taxes. Not the judgment. Not the compounding interest. He was about to hand his son a liability dressed up in 31 years of sentiment, and he had not said one word. I opened my bag. I took out my laptop. I pulled up the document I had put together in the spring, updated, because I had kept updating it month after month, because I couldn't help it, because numbers were the thing I understood. I turned the screen toward my brother and I said, "The business currently owes the state of Ohio $47,000 in back taxes and penalties. There's also a collections judgment of about $9,200 attached to the business credit. If you take ownership as of today, both of those become yours." The table was completely silent. My aunt said, "Oh my God." My brother turned to my father. "Dad." My father said, "It's manageable. The business makes enough to Dad." Danny's voice was different now. The easy looseness was gone. "You were going to give me a business with $50,000 in debt and not tell me?" 56, I said, not to be cruel, just because I deal in precision. My mother said my name again, sharper this time. I closed the laptop. "I want to be honest with you about something. Some people, when they hear this story, say I should have told my brother privately, that I should have pulled him aside before the dinner, spared him the humiliation of finding out in front of everyone. And I have thought about that. I have thought about it a lot, but here is what I know. My father had 3 months to tell him. 3 months from the day I sat at that kitchen table and walked him through every number. And he chose for 3 months not to say a word. He sat across from his son at dinners and on phone calls and said nothing. He arranged a celebration. He set the good plates. I was not going to let my brother walk out of that dinner having signed paperwork on something he didn't understand, not because I wanted to humiliate anyone, but because I know what $47,000 in tax debt does to a small business. I know what a collections judgment does to your ability to get credit. I know because I did the work that my father asked me to do and then watched him do nothing with it. The dinner ended the way dinners like that end. Not with a scene exactly, with a kind of deflation. My aunt asked if there was dessert. Roger excused himself early. My cousin found something urgent on her phone. My mother started clearing plates before anyone had finished. My father and Danny went into the study. I could hear them through the door, not the words, just the register of it, my father's voice low and explanatory, my brother's voice cycling between hurt and anger. I washed dishes. I am a person who washes dishes when I don't know what else to do with my body. My mother came into the kitchen and stood beside me and didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "You didn't have to do it like that." I said, "I know you feel that way." She said, "He's your brother." I said, "That's why I did it." She made a sound, not quite a word, and went back to the dining room. Here's what happened in the weeks after. My brother did not take over the business. He sat down with the business attorney, his own, someone he found himself, which was frankly the most organized I had seen him in years, and the attorney confirmed everything in my document. The attorney also found two things I hadn't caught: a personal guarantee my father had signed on a piece of leased equipment, and a lapse in the business's liability insurance that had gone on for 7 months. My brother called me on a Thursday evening. He asked if I had known about the insurance lapse. I told him I hadn't. I'd been working from the financial records, and that kind of thing doesn't always surface there. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you." Just that. 2 words. I said, "Of course." He said, "I'm not taking it. The business, not like this." I said I understood. He said, "Did you know he was going to do this? The whole thing. Not tell me, do the whole dinner, all of it?" I thought about how to answer that. I said, "I knew he hadn't told you." I did nodded the no. "I did not at least," my mother called. Another silence. He said, "Why didn't you just call me yourself months ago?" And that is the question I have had to sit with. The honest answer is that I thought my father would do it. I believed for 3 months that my father would look at his son and tell him the truth. I kept waiting for him to be the person I needed him to be, and he wasn't. I told my brother that. I told him I was sorry for waiting. He said, "It's not your fault." My father eventually settled the tax debt through a payment plan. It took hiring an actual accountant, which cost money, and a conversation with the state that was uncomfortable for everyone involved. The collections judgment got resolved. The business is still operating, smaller now, my father running it himself with a part-time employee, because 2 of the long-term staff left during the uncertainty of those months. Danny went back to figuring things out. I don't say that dismissively. I actually think he's going to be okay. He called me a few weeks ago to ask about setting up an LLC for a new idea he has. I walked him through it. We were on the phone for almost an hour. It felt, for the first time in a long time, like talking to my actual brother. My relationship with my parents is different now. Not broken, but recalibrated. My mother still calls every Sunday. My father asks about my work. Nobody brings up the dinner. We have all made a tacit agreement to file it somewhere and not revisit it, and I'm not sure that's healthy, but it is where we are. What I think about sometimes is the version of that night where I said nothing, where I sat at the good plates and smiled and let my brother walk out of there, having agreed to take a business he didn't understand, carrying debt he didn't know about, inheriting a problem that would have taken him years to untangle, if he ever did. And I think about what it would mean to love someone the way my parents loved Danny, completely, protectively, in a way that never prepared him for anything hard. And I think about what it means to be loved the way they loved me, with confidence, with the assumption that I would be fine, which is sometimes just another way of not paying attention. I don't know which version of love was harder to receive. I'm still working that out. What I know is this: numbers don't lie. They don't have favorites. They sit there on the page and they tell you exactly what is true if you're willing to look. I was willing to look. That has always been the thing about me that nobody in my family quite knew what to do with. But that night, at that table, I think for the first time, it was exactly the right thing to be. If any part of this story sounds like something you've lived, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments. And if you're watching this late, like most of you are, thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.